I got
And
you.
I'm an independent now. I can't stand the Democratic Party.
Really? What happened? What caused you to change?
They decided to be anti-family and anti-man, and I don't buy into that.
Has it?
All right. So we back with another episode from the Porter Perspective, a podcast specifically for men that focuses on life lessons, teachable moments, and correctable actions. So again, we're back with another Judge Joe Brown exclusive. Special shout out to Valuetainment and the PBD podcast. Definitely go check them out. Judge Joe Brown, who is a staple and elder within our community, and he's just made some interesting statements, and it may sound like revelation to some people may agree, some may disagree, but the reality is that he says that he is an independent, not a Republican, not a Democrat. And I think this really speaks to, if you all don't know, Dr. Claude Anderson. Dr. Claude Anderson has a series of books, but he has a book called Powernomics, and he discusses, and not even just Dr. Claude Anderson, but Dr. Amos Wilson as well, but just the power of the Black vote and the power, the collective political power that we can have. Because at the end of the day, we saw what happened with Ice Cube, even when he was willing to sit with whether it's Democrats or Republican leaders to try to get some type of agenda for Black people and our interests done. Because regardless of who is in office, it's less about that and more about how they are serving our particular interests. How are you creating more opportunities? How are you eliminating more hurdles, more barriers for access to entry? How are we able to leverage your political influence for our empowerment? That's the primary focus. It really doesn't matter who is in office if we do not ensure that they are advocating and moving forward with our best interest in mind. And to be honest, it does come down to dollars and accountability. So we have to look at accountable dollars as it relates to action, because dollars help put them in office. I mean, it helps them run the campaign for them to do what they need to do. So we also have to look at how much we're willing to invest into our politicians. And then secondarily, we have to look at how we're holding them accountable to make sure they understand that we put them in that position and that we will remove them if they are not adhering to the plan that we have rolled out for them. And this is why it's important to select a person that is, of our own, not just a person that is of our hue, but of our mindset. So we have to look at that. So again, this may be revelatory to you, the fact that Judge O'Brown has said that he does not coincide with the Democratic Party. And I mean, again, he says anti-family, anti-man. And just as a man myself, and I've been evaluating and just looking at the Democratic Party for, the past couple of years, specifically, as you become more politically inclined, and you notice that there are a lot of things. I mean, from just Joe Biden just having the Trans Visibility Day, the push for the LGBTQIA over any other sphere within the Democratic Party. It's just very, 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 very telling and very interesting in how it has led to the diminishing of the family structure overall. Like, you can have these other things, but you have to also look at how it is impacting the nuclear family. And it's become problematic at this point, but let's keep going. Let's unpack.
It always been like that?
No, it wasn't. Something happened. They kind of got stuck over there in that far left corner someplace, and they forgot about the working people in this country.
When do you think that happened, Judge? Because you ran as a Democrat. Now you're
I did. It bothers me. Somewhere in the last 55 years, what's happened is the country is switched over into glorifying what I call dysfunction. And at some point, it's just enough is enough. You've got a thing right now where they're trying to groom children in school. They're trying to install a secular religion as the official religion of the country. People don't have any cause, any purpose anymore. So they want to give them one. But in this one, it says you have no duty, honor, obligation, responsibility, accountability, be what the hell you want to be. just get your freak on and there you go. But that's not sufficient to keep people working.
Now, when you say 55 years, is it probably closer to the last 15 years that it's
No, it's
really
been working. See, I remember the class UCLA 1969, and I remember what was being said back then when people said we hate men for one reason or another, and men are the cause of war, so we're gonna ruin this thing for the men and get rid of masculinity. And you had this problem with Hollywood when it was going broke in the face of color television, and you switched from 2 movies every Thursday and Sunday every week of the year, and Hollywood was going broke. So they said, let's ramp the fee up from 50 cents to $1.50. And we will have one movie that stays in as long as we can. So let's attract the most people by going to the lowest common denominator, promoting dysfunction, ridiculousness. And meanwhile, we can propagandize the country to get rid of manhood. And that basically is what's been happening.
And by the way, these are some of the topics I've got that I want to talk about today. One is family, feminism, manhood, politics over the last 50, 60 years, fatherless homes, statistics I have on how many single mothers we used to have in the 40s versus 60s today, LBJ's policies in 1965. Maybe you have some thoughts on that, on what changed when he came out with that. And then we got destruction of the black family, masculinity, LGBTQ, and a few other things. War on drugs, a little bit of that with Nixon. Was that a good thing? Did they choose the right enemy? Michelle Obama, Kamala Harris, Trump, Biden, and maybe a little bit of San Francisco cleaning up the streets this quickly. They got this new technology called G. G shows up, streets of San Francisco clean up very quickly. So let's go to the direction you were going, okay? The direction you're going on, what's changed? You said, he said 15 years. You said, no, not necessarily. It's more like 50 years, right?
55.
Was it 55 years?
Yeah, and just as a frame of reference, I might have to pull that video. It's a video from, I want to say, has to be the 70s or 80s, but it's a social experiment in which they're asking a group of young black girls about whether they would want to have a family or raise their child on their own. And for the most part, most of those young girls said that they would rather raise the child on their own versus having a family. And so this idea of single motherhood has been, implanted in the mind of a lot of our women intentionally. And, just going back to how everything just comes full circle, especially with the influence of social media, the influence of influencers, the leveraging of these platforms. People are being programmed to think a certain way, and they're not even conscious of the program. They're simply just participating voluntarily, unbeknownst to them, and doing things that they really ordinarily wouldn't do, but it has led to a glorified dysfunction. And it has led to the unraveling of what we stand on as a nuclear family, as men, and as women, as righteous human beings. So let's keep going.
Judge, is it more policies? Was it more with a intent? What was the intent? Was the intent because they were trying to please everybody? Was the intent because malicious reasons? Was the intent political? What was the reasons why we've gone through the transitions we've gone through the last 55 years?
Okay, the Johnson administration came up with a safety net. They had good intentions, but people are enterprising. So when they saw the opportunities that were presented, they went for them. And instead of having a safety net that dealt with rescuing people from an untenable situation due to the economics that they found themselves faced with, you got people that said, well, instead of using this to help me with my babies, I use babies to get that so I can help myself. So you have multi-generational situations. And even back in the late 90s, I had people in my courtroom where there were 6 generations where nobody had had a job ever. I had one woman in my courtroom starting in 1994. She had felony drug and theft charges. She was 57. She had a 43-year-old daughter that was in front of me that she had when she was 14. 43-year-old daughter had the same charges. The 43-year-old daughter had a 34-year-old daughter born 1 week shy of her 10th birthday, who was in there. The 34-year-old had a 21-year-old daughter in front of me. The 21-year-old daughter had an 11-year-old daughter.
Please don't go low.
Who had the circumstance of being pregnant with her second child.
No way.
With her second child.
Oh my Lord. Wow. Wow. So for a little bit of context, just so everybody is understanding, the framework of what's going on with former President Lyndon B. Johnson, there was a program known as the Great Society, right? And, everybody should know that President Lyndon B. Johnson came into power after the assassination of former President John F. Kennedy. And so the Great Society was a part of a series of policy initiatives, legislation, and programs where the idea was to eradicate poverty, reduce crime, eliminate inequality, and improve the overall environment. And so the intention may have been there for there to be a greater America per se. However, people will always look for ways to exploit the weaknesses of something for their own betterment and empowerment. And this is just the nature of people. And then even more so, just along with just President Lyndon B. Johnson at that time. I mean, of course, he's thinking about re-election. He's thinking about, championing these causes and putting himself in a different light with social reform. So I think it's very important that, people understand the Great Society and the programs that were in place, because that's what he's referring to in the situation.
An 11-year-old, sir?
Yeah. So I got the 21-year-old back in about 14, 15 months. She was 23. Her 11-year-old was 13 with 3 children. The 57-year-old was back in front of me. She was 59, and she had at that point 342 lineal descendants we tracked. And then 2 weeks later, after I got that report, she had 358. And between 1996 and 2000, when I retired, exponential increase, she had more than 3,400. And I had 120 plus of her people in front of me in my courtroom, one way or another. One of her sons had 63 outside children by, I think, 59 different baby mamas, and he was 29.
63, 59, he's 29.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So, I mean,
this is almost unheard of. But again, this goes back to what he's saying about glorified dysfunction. For a person to be 13 and have 3 children, I mean, this is ridiculous.
People don't even think about this kind of thing. And then we did another study. We found in the high schools in the Memphis area, there were maybe 35 or 40 core problems where the students were much older than they were supposed to be, and they were creating a negative culture for the whole high school. And we found out that this woman that I had in my courtroom and 4 others, every single one of the 5 that they had in there that we were tracking was an ancestor for every single one of the kids in the high schools that were the core of the problem. So just total dysfunction. And the last we checked was 2008. It turned out these 5 women had almost 250,000 people in West Tennessee that were descended of them, and they were still breathing.
safe to say that they've never even heard of the word condom, is what you're saying.
Yeah, not only that, but in this group.
Oh man, it's safe to say that they never even heard of the word condom. Hey man, listen, man. Hoes have been around for a long time. Jezebel spirits have been around for a long time, and when these things go unchecked, things get out of line. Crazy.
3,400 that I wound up dealing with before I retired in 2000. Out of this family, we found 2 people that had jobs and graduated from high school, and they were girls who had essentially been kidnapped by their fathers when their mothers went to the penitentiary and got taken to Chicago, which then had a pretty good school system. So those were the only 2 we could find. But see, there's a mass of that out there. So when you talk about the impact of what happened with the Johnson administration, I don't think they intended that, but it happened. Next thing we had in the late 60s, we had the individuals that hated that they weren't men, that's the feminists, the ones that hated men, certain of the lesbians, the one that hated that they weren't strong men, those were the beta boys, some of the gay ones that hated that they weren't normal men, and then you had the ones that stacked on and gave the big ballast that said men were the cause of war, man. We need to have love, man. That war is a bad thing, man.
There we go. That's a breakdown right there. So I need for men to be able to understand what the enemy could look like. So he spoke to feminists. He spoke to what he perceives as beta boys. He spoke to lesbians. He spoke to, well, lesbians with that mindset, right? To eliminate masculinity per se. He spoke to various sectors, those that are gay, that like he's speaking to these various sectors that potentially could be problematic for men, for what a man really looks like, acts like, thinks like, and so forth. Okay, so we need to be able to identify that, because I mean, definitely when we start unpacking the Black Lives Matter and that organization and what that organization has always stood for, especially when you look at that mission statement, these are things that we have to be conscious of. And going back to the man understanding what their enemy could look like, you have to know this. You have to be aware.
We need to get rid of all of this toxic masculinity, like, fool. Where do you think this is gonna go? So it went there, and they control the communications media, and you get what you get right now, where if you go on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, you get this mass censorship where you can't say anything that makes people feel uncomfortable. Oh my God, he hurt somebody's feelings. Oh hell, a lot of people need the feelings stomped on, like, dude, what's wrong with you? Come grow stronger.
But the Judge, you've been around when you're doing meeting with all these families. What part of the responsibility is mothers? What part of the responsibility is on the father? Because typically the blame goes on the father.
Well, there are no fathers. And see, the thing of it is, these men that just ran off and left the women, these women don't want the men. All they wanted was the babies. And see, you had people like
and that's an important factor. And my question to anybody in the comments, do men understand how to identify a woman that wants a family rather than a woman that simply wants the children?
Poetress Nikki Giovanni back in the 60s were going all around the country, and they were lecturing the women, and they were young women, and they were saying, you don't need a father for your children. Just get preggo, find one that looks good, smart, athletic. Yeah, that one. And don't even tell him that he's the daddy, because if you bring a man into the picture, they screw up everything. So there was this point where if you had the guy around, there was a problem. And then there was some that did want the guy around. But back when I first started practicing law 50 years ago, one of our #1 cases was getting the check cut back on because some dang bad social worker would sit at the end of the block with binoculars. And if there was one or two of the 6 or 7 baby daddies trying to play father, they'd cut the check off. So we had problems with juvenile courts around the country where, Judge, that's not my kid. Well, you feed it.
I mean, and this is something that's still going on. I have family members who have stayed in Section 8 housing, and in the event that there is a man who could be living or contributing in a certain way financially, like those women would be disqualified from not only staying there, just from any of the benefits that came therefrom. So this is something that is ongoing. Actually, this happened with one of my close family members. And so, I just think it is induced, like it is planned, it is systematic, the elimination of the man from the home in exchange for the economics that the government can bring. And so what ends up happening is that the government serves as a surrogate father because of the so-called financial benefits, whereas the man is now excommunicated and from even having that relationship, and it leads to a spiritually imbalanced dynamic between the man and a woman, or their husband and wife, because the man is estranged and in some shape, form, or fashion alienated from having the dominion over his household. And in the absence of that spiritual presence, the matriarchal energy is there, and it goes unchecked in a lot of instances, and it can turn for the worse without that leadership in that direction. So just being conscious of that. And in many instances, sometimes like women are doing the best that they can and the best that they know how. So when you don't have the proper guidance or the proper tutelage, for that, it can lead to those dynamics. But then let's take it a step further. Before the kids get here, are we thinking about planning for the children? Because a lot of times these children are unplanned. And so that leads to generational curses occurring, because a lot of times we're not having the foresight on what this child's life will look like 20 years, 30 years down the line. We're just having children, willy-nilly, unprotected, when a lot of this could have been avoided with protection, or this could have been avoided with just not having sex at all at that present moment in time. So just thinking about how we need to navigate our own sexual experiences so that we can think about what the outcome would be, is critical. I mean, and of course, things happen, but a lot of these things can be avoided with decisions. And when these things do happen, having those tough conversations about how you're going to grow and evolve with this other person that you're bringing into the world, and with the person that helped you bring this person into the world, and what does that dynamic look like? And are there other strong, male or more appropriate, male figures that can actually provide some frame of reference on masculinity that's centered around the duty, obligation, honor, respect, accountability, solution, cause oriented, and so forth. Because again, you can have people that may bring the child into the world, but they may lack those qualities and those characteristics. And then that becomes even more counterintuitive for the child that is here, that is that young boy that's becoming a man, because they don't even grasp, or they don't even have that level of guidance in masculinity in that way. So, but again, these are all things to think about, right? And I know that, sex, it can feel amazing, but really thinking about the long-term consequences. And that's why with this channel, with the men, you have to be thinking this through. You have to be thinking about your next 100 years and each of your steps. All right. About wrapping this up.
Long enough, you look just like you. So, that was before DNA. And I can remember one thing. It was a cop I was representing, and he got a petition to increase the child support. So when he called the kid's name, I stood up, he stood up, 2 more lawyers stood up, and 2 other guys stood up. So this woman was collecting child support from 3 guys for the same kids. So we finagled getting some DNA testing, and none of the three were the daddies.
No way.
So
This is out of control. This is out of control. But again, this goes back to what we're doing. We are establishing the emphasis on a nuclear family. That's number one. We are acknowledging that there are other family dynamics that exist that can possibly be more so productive than counterproductive for our community and our people. We are also establishing that there should be incentives, for long-term relationships that turn into marriage, and also establishing incentives for children that go on to be contributing aspects of the American society. And what I mean by that is whether they're going to college, going to trade school, going to the army, going to the military, what have you, just finding ways in which we can reward those individuals that are going on to be productive members of society, and reward those parents for producing productive members of our society. I think that there should be more incentives there, whether it's tax breaks, whether it's programs that show our respect and our honor of those individuals, because these are things that people should be doing, but incentivizing it with these type of government incentives, I think that that's always a great thing. Also, I think that there should be more government incentives around encouraging marriage, and that lead to you being with that person for the long term. There should be more equitable rights when it comes to the child support process, and in terms of just child support in and of itself. And we just heard it from Judge Joe Brown. Paternity tests should just be mandatory. And of course, this is a state by state related issue as it relates to just like that institution of marriage, and that could potentially lead to divorce. But there are so many situations in which, and we probably have to do a series on that, just related to paternity fraud. I mean, you think about Maury, just all these different shows. I mean, it's just outright ridiculous. That they'll say mama's baby, daddy's baby, right? So just people not even being forthright in whether or not this is actually your child. And imagine playing the role and thinking that this is your biological son, only to realize that you were being used the entire time, and that was never going to even come out until you asked the questions or you took the test, or so just looking at that needs to be a prerequisite before you get ready to sign anything or endorse anything. You need to go ahead and make sure that there's a paternity test that has been taken, and you have 100% confirmation. It does not matter that you think that this person would never do this. This is all about just having that certain level of certainty, because this is a lifelong commitment, and it is not fair to that child to disrupt or that whatever that dynamic is, because that child believes you're their father. Then all of a sudden they found out that you're not their father. Then it just leads to a spiritual imbalance. So let's get everything out on the table, and based on that, that woman can receive child support and all these other things, in an equitable fashion. So let's just do things that make sense. But receiving child support from 3 different people is, that's crazy work.
So, I mean, you have these horror stories going on.
That's some old school, Jerry.
Sir,
was this mostly whites, blacks, Latinos?
Both.
All of the above.
All of the above. The juvenile courts started privatizing and acquiring jurisdiction that used to be in superior or circuit courts. So they became dysfunctional circuses, and a lot of them privatized. And what happens is you want to promote dysfunction because that's business now.
And again, it goes back to the corporatocracy of America. Everything is about making the dollar. It's not about the morals. It's not about the values. It's not about living within, an institution that promotes, proper social responsibility, decorum, and values. But again, this has been another episode. Go ahead, tune in, tap into the Porter Perspective. Definitely feel free to email me questions, send me different videos, and, we'll get it going from there.